On this Tuesday night, protecting people from extreme heat. Lessons learned from BC's tragic summer.
People didn't take it as seriously as they thought, and we're all guilty of that.
Youth who say they were unjustly restrained at private group homes.
My arm snapped.
Global News investigates.
Okay, whoa.
Inside Chernobyl, the dangerous damage Russian forces dug up, mystifying the city's residents. And going off before taking off.
This is the worst airport on Earth.
A former NHLer highlights major turbulence at Canada's airports.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Chris Galis.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We start with a bombshell report confirming the deadly impacts of climate change. The heat dome that hit BC early last summer killed more than 600 people who died of heat-related illness. Today, the BC government promised new strategies to deal with extreme temperatures.
If you think about it, people dying from heat is not a failure of the health system, it's a failure of the way that we live. And it's a surrogate, the more burden we put on the health system at times like this, it's more of a surrogate of how badly we failed in the way that we're actually sort of planning our cities and our homes.
Even though climate change affects all Canadians, some are more vulnerable than others. And Eric Sorensen has tonight's top story.
There had never been a heat wave like it in British Columbia. In 1 week last June, more than 600 people died. Most were older. Almost all were in their homes, often alone. In spite of warnings from forecasters days beforehand, the BC coroner's review found that public agencies did not respond quickly enough. But neither did British Columbians, unaccustomed to taking heat precautions or just checking on their neighbors.
People didn't take it as seriously as they thought, as we perhaps now think we should have taken it. And we're all guilty of that.
The government has announced its first change. An extreme heat warning is being added to the emergency text alert system. A recognition that the heat dome trapping high temperatures for days on end was a crisis that grew gradually, hour by hour. Warnings will now be triggered when there is excessive heat for 2 days, from above 29 Celsius in areas like Vancouver to above 35 in the BC interior. And an extreme heat emergency could be declared after 3 days, with nighttime temperature thresholds as well.
There will be much more notification, much more in the media, if you like, and also much more communication with local governments.
The review calls for more resources, such as paramedics, to respond to emergencies, and that more homes should be cooled or that more cooling centers be created where the most vulnerable can be brought. Building codes may have to adapt. Houses built to keep in the heat in Canada's winter climate now trap the summer heat in regions that have never been outfitted with much air conditioning.
Now that's kind of biting us. And so essentially we have to turn around the way we look at things to make sure that we're able to cool our buildings effectively as well as heat them up.
Canada's climate future dictates that mitigating the effects of heat must become a priority, and not just in BC.
Certainly, heat is not only impacting BC, but provinces across the country, including the territories as well. The extreme heat we saw in 2021, we had never seen that before. But what we do know is that as the climate changes, we will see that again. And that's something that we need to be prepared for.
Prepared with new policies for a cold weather nation to adapt to a hotter climate. Eric Sorensen, Global News.
In Manitoba, a search of the Sag King First Nation has identified nearly 200 anomalies in the ground near the site of the former Fort Alexander Residential School. Ground-penetrating radar was done in the community last June. Work is now underway to determine whether the findings could be unmarked graves of residential school students. 190 disturbances in the ground were found over 2 sites near the school. Pipelines, water lines, and sewer lines have all been ruled out. We continue our series investigating the state of Ontario's child welfare system tonight with a startling figure, 2,000. That is the number of times in a single year kids and youth in that province were physically restrained. 87% of the time it happened in group homes where kids live in a communal house with staff. A joint investigation by Global News and APTN also found a pattern of physical interventions at some privately operated group homes and youth who say the use was unjustified. Carolyn Jarvis shows us firsthand what it means to be restrained.
I'm going to fold you down.
This
Whoa, okay.
Is what a restraint can look like for kids in group homes.
I'm going to go quick.
Okay.
This is how you hold somebody in a prone position.
A physical intervention the Ontario government only permits as a last resort.
And so this is where a restraint could stop.
Yeah.
When there's an imminent risk of harm to a youth or others.
Little step down.
Okay, whoa.
But people who grew up in group homes told us they're used far more frequently to get kids to comply.
For me, it feels like a body check to the floor.
Ari Calero Romero, who was developmentally delayed, was restrained 69 times during the year and a half he lived at an Ottawa group home.
Pain.
It hurts.
Yes.
Ari lived at a group home run by a private company called Mary Homes, which, according to our analysis, had one of the highest number of physical interventions among service providers in the province.
My arm snapped.
Ari was 12 in September of 2019 when he was restrained on the floor yet again. His account of what happened and the incident report from workers differs greatly. What isn't contested is that it ended with his left arm broken. Ari is now suing Mary Homes for $200,000. Mary Homes wouldn't comment on the incident nor its frequent use of restraints, but intends to defend against the lawsuit.
It's a very scary experience, especially for kids with mental health issues.
Psychologist Maurice Ferrugi says restraints are an ineffective tool that further damages vulnerable young people.
We hear that all the time, that they have been traumatized and they will have specific flashbacks of experiences when they were restrained, and these will last throughout their lives.
It tells me that adults have lost control.
What's crucial, says crisis intervention trainer Steve Hall, is that staff know how to de-escalate situations.
Carolyn, we don't want to go here.
And not be triggered themselves.
A vast majority of the situations that I was involved with or I witnessed could have been avoided if adults would have been in better balance emotionally.
He says the best restraint comes from care providers who don't use force. Carolyn Jarvis, Global News, Toronto.
The trial of a Dutch man accused of sextorting and harassing Canadian teenager Amanda Todd continues today with her mother on the stand. Carol Todd testified she first learned about her daughter's online activities in 2011 when Amanda discovered a Facebook profile which was using topless images of her. The account had linked her friends and acquaintances at school, which Carol says pushed Amanda to stop going to school out of fear of being confronted by students. She ended up taking her own life in 2012. The accused, Aidan Coben, was extradited to Canada to face trial in 2020. He's pleaded not guilty to 5 charges, including extortion and possession of child pornography. In Ukraine, outnumbered troops continue to defend the city of Severodonetsk as Russian forces reportedly work to deploy reinforcements to help capture the key eastern hub. The city's mayor says Ukrainian forces have strengthened their positions and are holding the line, but Moscow says troops have been advancing and, quote, fully liberated residential areas of the city. Russia says it now controls 97% of the surrounding Luhansk region in eastern Ukraine. UN nuclear watchdogs have just ended a visit to Chornobyl, one of the first cities overrun in Moscow's invasion. Near the site of the former nuclear disaster, Russian forces stirred up enough soil to create new radiation hotspots. Jeff Semple shows us the mess left behind at one of the world's most toxic places.
Chernobyl is synonymous with danger. Driving into the North Ukrainian city, we're warned to keep our windows shut. Radiation levels in some spots remain dangerously high, 36 years since the world's worst nuclear plant disaster. Engineer Alexander Skirita and his colleagues are responsible for maintaining the area around the notorious nuclear plant. They're only permitted to live here 15 days per month to limit their exposure, which makes the Russian military's actions here difficult to comprehend. The whole world knows about Chernobyl, he says. I can't understand the Russian brain. What were they thinking? After the Russian retreat, Skirita returned to work to find this. His office, like so many others here, ransacked and looted. His computer among the thousands of pieces of highly sensitive and expensive equipment, either stolen or destroyed. They made a mess of everything, he says. Chornobyl sits a short drive from the Belarus border and was quickly captured by Russian troops on the first day of the invasion. This resident says the Russians caught her trying to contact Ukrainian authorities. They forced me to my knees with a gun to my head, she says. I thought I was going to die. When the Russians finally left after 5 weeks, she says they strapped washing machines and other household appliances to the tops of their tanks. But the greatest damage done by Russian soldiers here might have actually been to themselves.
This is the edge of the so-called red forest in Chernobyl, and it has that name because a lot of evergreen trees here have turned a shade of reddish orange as a result of the high level of radiation that exists on the soil. We're only being allowed to visit here for a few minutes, but it seems the Russians stayed here for a few weeks, not only in the red forest, but digging trenches in the soil. There are food containers scattered all around here. They even used some of the sand to make sandbags.
You have to be crazy or stupid to do that kind of thing. Do they have a death wish? Asked this member of Ukraine's National Guard. He showed us numerous examples where the Russians trampled, bulldozed, and dug up one of the most toxic places on Earth, possibly inhaling the dangerous dust. Our informants in Belarus told us that some of the Russian soldiers who stayed in those trenches were later hospitalized, he says. Ukraine's nuclear scientists say radiation levels at the Chernobyl site are now safe, but the Russian activity disrupted enough soil to create additional radiation hotspots. The worst-case scenario, once feared, was avoided, but more than 2 months since Russian troops left this area, crews have barely begun to clean up their mess. Jeff Semple, Global News, Chernobyl.
Going nowhere fast. Coming up, what's fueling grueling delays in Canada's airports? There's travel chaos across Canada tonight with pandemic protocols and staffing shortages blamed for flight cancellations and excruciating delays at airports and passport offices. The agony for passengers was captured by former NHLer Ryan Whitney in a Twitter post that's since gone viral. As Abigail Beeman reports, the federal government promises it's working on things, but the bumpy ride might get worse before it gets better.
I'm so in shock at this place. It is the biggest disgrace known to man.
Viewed close to 2 million times, this seething rant about Toronto's Pearson Airport from a former NHL player is echoing far and wide at a time when Canada's tourism industry needs a boost.
There is a 400-person line with 2 Air Canada workers. So I waited in that line about 6 hours. Near the end of the line, they closed it. They just said, oh, you have to go somewhere else.
Oh, bunch of folks, are you just joining the security line? Extreme delays have frustrated passengers finally trying to vacation for weeks.
I'm hoping that I don't miss my flight.
So far, I'm okay.
That's why we came early today.
You need to be prepared and you need to be flexible. We're making sure that we're not booking people on tight connections.
While the problems are mostly at Pearson, they affect travelers across Canada.
That's our gateway to Europe. It's our gateway to the Caribbean. And so I'm having to talk with clients every day. They're weighing the pros and cons of, should we go on this trip to the Caribbean? Because do we actually want to travel through Toronto?
Pearson blames passengers being held on planes, 53% in the last week of May, and calls on the federal government to drop inbound public health requirements.
We could go back to pre-COVID normal. That would have a huge impact. But then hiring more staff to be able to work security would be obviously very helpful.
It was something we could have predicted, and the government should have moved earlier.
This is a global context. Having said that, we have to do something.
The transport minister says security waits are improving, but can't say when everything will be fixed, calling it gradual.
Airline companies have not returned to full schedule yet. There are still some employee labor shortage issue. There are some process issues.
Another equally pressing problem, passport renewal delays. The government blames an unprecedented surge in demand. The opposition says it was totally predictable. Service Canada hired an extra 600 people and plans to double that in the next several weeks and reassign 600 more with passport experience. But there's no clear answer as to how soon the backlog will be cleared with the summer travel season on our doorstep. Chris?
All right, Abigail, thank you. That's Abigail Beeman in Ottawa. Just ahead, a golden opportunity for Canada at the Summit of the Americas.
Opportunity.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is in the U.S. this week for President Joe Biden's Summit of the Americas in Los Angeles. And while some countries weren't invited and others, most notably Mexico, have opted out, analysts say Canada is in a position to strengthen its presence across the region. David Akin is following the Prime Minister's trip. And David, Trudeau's first stop is at NORAD headquarters in Colorado.
Chris, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and his Defense Minister Anita Anand will be on the ground at Peterson Space Force Base in Colorado Springs for just a few hours. PMO officials say there is no specific announcement associated with this visit, but the Prime Minister will be briefed by military officials on NORAD's activities and much needed NORAD modernization.
Continental defense, and in fact hemispheric defense, is increasingly top of mind for Canada and its allies these days. Russia's invasion of Ukraine and Russia's subsequent threats to use nuclear weapons have heightened those concerns. Indeed, one of Trudeau's key objectives when he meets with leaders from the 32 other member nations this week is to build support in Central and South America for a strong response against Russia. So far, not everyone in the region, Mexico, for example, has condemned Russia's actions.
We see an opportunity.
Analysts also say that with the relative decline in the United States' influence in South and Central America, Canada has a golden opportunity to play a bigger role in helping others with everything from adapting to climate change to strengthening democracy and human rights.
Given the U.S. position on all of this, only makes Canada's potential role in the hemisphere, not just materially, but symbolically, really critical, right? I mean, Latin Americans who are struggling for democracy and human rights, they want to know that there's a big country in the neighborhood that's on their side.
We could be so much more if we just had the political will and the interest on the part of the Canadian government to really increase Canada's stature and presence and reputation in the region. And they want us to play a role.
Now, while he's in Los Angeles, the Prime Minister is going to have a meeting with the California Governor, Gavin Newsom. The two men are both progressive politicians, and we expect that they will have an announcement on a climate change agreement. The PM then heads back home Saturday. Chris?
David Akin in Ottawa. Thanks, David. Up next, families across two continents united by a Canadian war hero's sacrifice. Yesterday, on the 78th anniversary of D-Day, we introduced the story of Harvey Edgar Jones, a Canadian pilot who made the ultimate sacrifice during the Allied invasion that continues to ripple through the generations. Tonight, Dan Spector brings you part two of that special story, the debt of gratitude owed, and how decades later, the son of the soldier Jones managed to save was finally able to say thank you.
The fire was so violent that the bombs...
Harvey Engelberg feels his name bears responsibility.
Once I had my own kids, I started realizing the heavy debt that name gave me.
His father, Cobby Engelberg, an RCAF radio operator on a Dakota transport plane, survived the aircraft being shot down by the Germans on D-Day because pilot Harvey Edgar Jones stayed at the controls instead of parachuting out like the rest of the crew. Named after the pilot who saved his father, Harvey Engelberg feels it's his duty to honor his namesake.
I never met him, but to be named after somebody who died and you're supposed to honor his memory, I mean, that's a burden. It's a responsibility. How's that?
But in spite of his insatiable desire to show Jones's family gratitude, he never had luck tracking down his descendants or the Duhamels, the French farmers who pulled his father from the plane's burning wreckage after the Dakota crashed on their land. Engelberg has letters his father exchanged with the Duhamels in later years.
I will be indebted to you forever. Je vous serai obligé à jamais. how do you thank someone for saving your life?
So imagine Harvey Engelberg's surprise when a handwritten letter arrived at his Montreal home in March from Bassonville, France.
She said, I have pieces of your father's plane. Would you like them? And then I immediately said, yeah, I'm coming to see you.
Thérèse Ferré and her husband now live on that farm. 78 years after that fateful night, the couple found pieces of Dakota KG-356 while working the land.
On n'a jamais entendu parler de cet avion dans le village. Je trouvais ça dégueulasse.
In April, Engelberg visited the green pasture where the plane went down.
It was very emotional, but it was just amazing to see these strangers, 6,000 miles away, caring as much as me.
He donated the shards of twisted metal to the Juno Beach Centre, Canada's war museum in Normandy, where they will soon be displayed.
I honestly couldn't find a better story for us to be telling in our museum.
Although Engelberg felt some peace, his work still felt unfinished. He hadn't been able to thank Harvey Edgar Jones's family.
I almost hit a wall. I was trying.
That's where we hoped we might be able to help. Surely his relatives had to be out there somewhere.
My goal in life was to find out more about him that I could, and one day to thank his family. And here we are.
Helen Peterson is Harvey Jones's niece, the daughter of his older sister. She knew him as Uncle Harv.
He was my one and only uncle, my favorite uncle, you might say.
Finding out someone was named in his honor, she says, is a highlight of her life.
I'm just getting a little emotional over the whole thing and just thinking how wonderful it is.
Harvey Edgar Jones was first laid to rest in a well-maintained grave on the farm in France, but was reinterred at the Ranville War Cemetery in Normandy, alongside thousands of others who never made it home. He got a mention in dispatches for his heroism, but was never awarded a higher military honor like the Victoria Cross.
Probably the thing that stuck out to me the most is just that nobody knows, hardly anybody knows his story.
3 families on 2 continents forever connected by an act of bravery still felt through the generations. Hope this Canadian hero's story gets a second look. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
Thank you, Harvey. That is Global National for this Tuesday night. I'm Chris Galis. Tonight's Your Canada shows the Dandelions near Listowel, Ontario. We love seeing Your Canada, so please email your photos to viewers@globalnational.com. Thanks very much for watching. Donna Friesen will be back with you tomorrow. Hope you have a great evening.